Hi everyone, it's Lisa, your grief guide, and as you know, we've been having lots of different people tell their stories and share their grief journey with us. So today we have somebody I call Coop, and he is going to share his journey with us today. So welcome.
Hi.
Hi, and can you tell us a little bit about what's happened in your life in the last year or so?
Well, quickly, um, my 96-year-old father got sick and came home, and a couple months later he passed away in October. Actually, right on my wife's birthday, so it was very strange. And he lived with my younger brother, Jim, who everyone calls Rusty. He was redhead when he was born, but the redhead kind of faded away throughout the years. But he lived with my brother, who was very shy, never married. You know, just always like the Norwegian bachelors, the two of them together, and they were set in their ways. But the unique thing was that every Sunday we went to visit my father, brought him and my brother food, and then my wife would sit with my dad in the living room, and I would sit out at the kitchen counter with my brother Rusty. And he was shy but super smart, just really smart with electronics, and I dabble in the same things at work, and so he would tell me what project he was on. He was trying to hack into a computer on a car or something to alter it, and then I would, oh yeah, that's good, you know. But so with my father's passing, we still decided, well, let's just keep it up and we'll go visit my brother. And so we started seeing him typically Sundays, maybe once during the week too. And so my dad passed in the middle of October, and then at Thanksgiving time, my brother decided, well, I'm not really hungry, so I'm not going to come over. And we thought, well, that's not really like him, you know. So we just kind of gave up on that and just went around our thing. Still went on Sundays, but noticed he was just not eating as much. And my wife thought, well, that's kind of odd. And at Christmas time, we always make prime rib, and I had 2 big prime ribs, and my brother couldn't eat any. And we said, what's wrong? And he said, well, I'm having trouble swallowing. And he and my father had the same exact symptoms, and my father was diagnosed with GERD. And so my brother was trying to make all of his decisions around his symptoms being exactly like my father's, and he was self-medicating himself from YouTube and everything. And it got to the point where he was having a really hard time swallowing. So my younger sister just, you know, and I'm just oblivious, guys are oblivious, and my younger sister said, no, we're going to go in. So she took him in, and they were going to do a scope. They did a scope, and they couldn't get it down his throat because there was a mass. And so they discovered right then at Christmas time that he had esophageal cancer. And the prognosis was maybe 2-3 years. And so he's like, well, I think I read I can get 5 years, he said. You know, okay, so we're aggressively trying to figure this out. And it spread to his back, to his bones, and by January, and this was Christmas, by January he died. And it was, you know, I would say it was a shock for my father. He was 96, so you kind of expect something is going to happen. But my brother was 5 years younger than me, and it was just, and we were really tight. I mean, going through old pictures and things, and you oh yeah, I remember when we did this and did that, and it was just very, very hard.
Yeah, that's that back-to-back loss is a lot of grief.
One semi-expected, one completely unexpected.
Correct. Yeah, and even, you know, even when it's expected and it's the natural order, like, you know, that your father dies, it's still death, and death is final, and it's grief upon grief, right? Like,
Yeah.
so say a little bit more then about like your brother being 5 years younger than you.
Yeah.
Like how that's affected you and how that's impacted your grief journey.
Well, he was very, very quiet, like I mentioned earlier, and I think I was married for a couple of years before he even really talked to my wife. But now we got him out of his shell, and we got tighter than we had growing up. Really, I mean, in the last probably 5 years, we got super close. I mean, he was restoring an old FJ40 Toyota, and parts from '73 you couldn't get anymore, but I run the tool room for a window manufacturer, so I have access to any kind of equipment necessary, and so I was making pieces for him, and then, you know, we're just, it was kind of a mutual thing, and I don't know, it was just, I didn't cry, but I was just so in shock, I couldn't think straight. And
because it's like everything that you shared as brothers, as having common interests and common stories, it was all gone.
Completely gone.
Completely gone.
Completely gone. And since my father and my brother lived together, the house was empty then, and then with the four remaining siblings, we have to decide what we're going to do, and there's just, someone wants to sell the house right away, I want to keep the house, and it was just back and forth, and then it was just stress on stress.
What do you miss most about your brother?
The geeky things, talking electronics, talking mechanical things. I dug up some old pictures over the weekend that we grew up in Wakanda on the lake. I mean, right, basically on the lake. And I dug up some old pictures where we screwed together, the two of us screwed together a boat out of plywood and stole a motor out of another vehicle and mounted it in, and I found pictures of the maiden voyage, you know, and I saw that and I just kind of broke into tears a little bit, because here he is just, you know, riding along, and I just like,
Yeah, and they say, Coop, about sibling loss is that, like what you just shared, like that's only a story and experience that the two of you had, right? Not anybody else, not your other siblings, it was just the two of you, right? That you had shared stories and shared, you know, interest and inside jokes or whatever. And then when you lose that person, it's just done. Yeah, and I think that's the heaviness of the loss, would you say?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
yeah. And all the routines, like the routine of going there every Sunday, and
that's a big one. In fact, I was thinking of trying to think of things and preparing for tonight. What really hits me most is the loss of routine there, and not only the loss of the routine, but I catch myself even this week on Sunday. We're going out and about after church, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what can we bring over for supper tonight? And then I caught myself, and I'm just like, oh. And I even mentioned to my wife, I said, you know, we have to come up with something different we're going to do on Sunday nights now, because this is just...
Yeah, so painful.
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I have been married for 43 years, and we went over every Sunday for most of those years. The first few years, he came over when our children were younger, and my father would come over and bring my brother over on Sundays. But then when they got a little bit older, we morphed into us going over on Sundays, and it's just a complete loss of then you start thinking, well, what's going to happen when we have 2 children? What's going to happen if they lose us? What are they going to do? You know, how do we prepare them for that eventuality? Because I'm 70 and my wife's 72. I mean, really, how many days do we have?
Right.
There's nothing's guaranteed.
Right. Yeah, I think grieving people that are listening to this really need to hear that there's the loss of the person that we loved, but then there's all these other secondary losses, you know, the loss of dinners on Sundays, the loss of doing a hobby together. Those are all secondary losses that make the grief and the pain deeper. Yeah.
Right. I get angry with myself over... He had a house in Michigan, and once in a while he would just take off to Michigan. You know, when my father was a little bit younger, maybe in his 80s, that was fine. You know, mid-80s, that was okay. He could be by himself. But then my father fell a couple times, so there was this guilt that we threw on my brother. Myself and my younger sister would throw on him, well, you gotta let us know when you're going. So we ended up starting to stay with my father when my brother went to Michigan, and there was this bitterness I had toward my brother for just taking off. But then after he passed and we went to Michigan, no one had ever been to this house, and we went there to clean it up, and there was a note on the door from one of the neighbors that moved away. And then you think, well, he had this little 4 or 5 times a year he'd go up for a couple of weeks, and he had a whole nother life there that no one knew about. And we're discovering, and his neighbor, when we went up to clean the house out, and we got a dumpster, and the neighbor's son saw us by the dumpster and called his father, who lived an hour away. And by the time he got there, we had just left, so he missed us, and he knew something was up, but he didn't know that my brother passed. And so he looked online and found my brother's obituary, and then tracked my sister's phone number down and called her. And so it's now I feel guilty that he had this other little life that we were mad about, but he kind of needed.
Sure. Yeah. If you had to say, what has been most helpful to you on your grief journey?
As far as my brother, going through old pictures in the manuals, the things that we did together, and we used to collect beer cans together, and reminiscing through those, and reminiscing through things, and listening to music.
Has that brought you comfort?
Yeah, the music is something. I listen to music in the car on the way to work, and ones that we both liked. So there's...
That's good, because I know that for some people, in their grieving process, it takes them a long time to listen to music again or to look at pictures. But it's really good to hear you say that those things are actually bringing you comfort.
It brings me comfort, but I still get sad when I first notice a picture for the first time. But now that I brought the boat pictures into my boss today and bragged to him about the things my brother and I did. And my boss, we call him my boss, but we're almost like brothers, but he had a little connection with my brother too, because my father, he adopted my father like his father, because his father was older and passed away probably 8 years ago. And whenever I talked to my father at work, I would put my dad on the phone, but my dad would always brag about Rusty. And my brother Rusty was the smart one, you know, and I'm like, I'm getting all jealous now, you know.
Right.
And so then my boss would tease me for the rest of the day. Well, Uncle Rusty's a smart one, but then when I start, after my brother passed, I'm showing my boss Darb all these things that my brother had accomplished, all of his little projects, and he goes, well, I think your dad might have been right, you know, and I gotta admit that there was some technical things that were over my head that my brother was doing, that he never did any of that. He just worked in more or less menial jobs his career. So.
If you had to say, Coop, to anybody listening, like if you could tell them like one thing that they should really do, like when they're really hurting and in pain and grieving, what would you say to them?
I would say, don't hold it in. I held it in at first, and I refused to tear up, and don't hold in your grief. Keep it, and be honest to yourself about it. Don't try to man up or woman up or whatever.
Right.
Don't try to do that. Just kind of
let it come.
Let it come, because if you don't, you hold it in, it's gonna come out and sideways, and it might trigger you. I myself don't drink or anything. Really, I mean, I don't smoke, don't drink. I've never really had any medicinal vices like that, but I imagine if somebody did, and I could see where it could trigger you, and so you really let it go. As a matter of fact, my youngest brother, I had two brothers. My youngest brother is an alcoholic, and he called my sister, and she could tell he was drinking, and she said, "Have you been drinking?" And he says, "Well, what do you expect me to do?"
Right.
And I said, "Scotty, what the?"
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard because I haven't had that problem, so
Sure.
I
But it's easy to understand.
It's easy to understand how it could happen.
Of course, when you're in so much pain, right? You just don't want to be in pain anymore.
It shocked me that he said, "Well, what do you expect me to do?"
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
yeah. But no, I love
he's
that.
in Montana, so I couldn't get a hold of him and
sure.
shake him or something. And it's like,
yeah. No, I like that word though. Like, don't hold it in. It's because eventually it's gonna come out, and it's not good for you.
It could come out sideways,
Yes.
and you could, I mean,
yes.
As he would say, act out or something.
Yes,
you know,
of
there
course.
could be all kinds of.
Of course, yeah. Well, thanks for being with us today, Coop. I really appreciate you sharing your journey with us and those things that have helped you. I know it's going to help somebody.
I hope so.
Yeah, it will, for sure. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.
Thanks.